Following Jesus is hazardous, perilous, and probably the most dangerous occupation in the world. It's difficult for us, living in a country with freedom of religion in its foundational document, to recognize adversity in the practice of our faith. But the history of the church is blood-stained, sacrificial, life-surrendering in order that the faith may truly live. Over and over again, witnesses have stood up against powers and principalities, against kings, princes, authorities throughout the world. Some still are today. One of those people of recent memory that stood up was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian who taught seminary students in a secret seminary, a Lutheran church that was against the Nazis who took over the German Lutheran church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was arrested for his association with an assassination attempt against Adolf Hitler and was sent to prison. But before the war, he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, or actually in the German it's simply Discipleship. And as he saw the war clouds and the threat of Hitler growing in Germany, he wrote, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die." Dietrich Bonhoeffer indeed died. He was hung at the prison he was moved to just days before the Allies liberated it. What do you think of a job description that Jesus is kind of offering us here as inevitable in the life of faith? He offers probable arrest and persecution, being brought before authorities, both religious and secular, local or national, to testify to him. That we are not to have any advanced preparation for our testimony, but trust in what he will tell us to say in the moment, and the wisdom that we will be able to withstand from the opponents. That we will likely be betrayed either by parents, siblings, relatives, or friends. That there is the possibility that our life will be taken. And we are most assured that everyone will hate us. Would this be a job that you would be ready to apply for? For it is the description of the life of faith that Jesus is reminding us will be necessary to follow him. Now, this reading from the Gospel of Luke is highlighted as the destruction of the temple foretold. The temple in Jerusalem, Jesus has arrived. The long journey is over. We are waiting for trial, arrest, crucifixion to come. It's hard for us to imagine, considering it's been 2,000 years since the edifice stood, how majestic this construction was in Jerusalem. You see, after the Babylonian exile, the Jews who returned started to build a new temple called Zerubbabel's temple. It was a modest thing. Indeed, we have a little description of when the temple was completed in Ezra and Nehemiah, that those who could remember the beauty of Solomon's temple wept at the limitations of the new temple. And this temple had stood for about 5 centuries. until Herod the Great arrived. And Herod the Great began a major construction project shortly after he ascended to the throne of the land of Palestine, as the Romans called it. He leveled all around the mountaintop temple site, expanding it from its existing 17 acres to over 36 acres. The sacrifices required at the temple continued, so it is considered a second temple, even though for all practical purposes, Zerubbabel's temple was torn down for Herod's majestic temple to be built upon it. He built this huge platform of 36 acres. But since Herod was forbidden to have anything to do with rebuilding the temple proper, where the priests would enter the Holy of Holies and the sacrifices and practices only allowed by Jewish men and then only by priestly authorities, the main parts were finished, but it was still a construction site in Jesus' day. It had been a construction site for some 46 years, and it would not be completed for another 30. Josephus, an early Jewish person of the 1st, 2nd century, explaining the situation that led to the Jewish revolt of 70 AD, describes the temple as a white snow-capped mountain from the distance, that its brightness, the white marble, and the gold plates that were used to adorn her were so bright that it looked like a sunrise when the sun struck Jerusalem. And of course, it was the tallest point in the city of Jerusalem, so all could see. It was never included among the 7 wonders of the world, but if there was a secondary list of wonders in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, the temple in Jerusalem would certainly be among the greats there. It was finished in 63 and completely destroyed in 70 AD. Now, some of you may have heard or even have visited the Western Wall and may have wondered, when Jesus speaks about not a stone will be on top of stone, then what are the stones on the Western Wall? Well, the stones on the Western Wall are the retaining wall of the platform. Nothing of Herod's temple stands on the Temple Mount. His platform still stands, but the Dome of the Rock is near where the temple was standing. So it would be indeed very disturbing to hear Jesus proclaim that this magnificent 40-plus year construction site would vanish someday. This is just after the story of the widow who gave her last 2 coins, a penny's worth, towards the upkeep and sacrifice system that is the temple. And it's not a compliment that Jesus extends, but a conviction of the temple system that even demands widows' pennies for its sustenance. So no doubt when Jesus uttered these words that not a stone will stand, the group, which is probably a mix between disciples and crowds, although Luke doesn't talk about disciples in this section, they ask the obvious: when will it happen? And what will let us know of the impending destruction? Now, Jesus is asked about 300 questions in the Gospels. And those who have counted have discovered only about 3 questions answered directly by Jesus. The rest he asks with another question, usually, or gives a parable revealing the what of the kingdom of heaven rather than any how or when. But this closing sermon is a confusing timeline of whens that are not timeline dated and whats that are not predictions. Jesus is drifting from warning about false teachers proclaiming both his identity and offering confirmation of the soon end, and then political uprisings, military conquests, physical disasters like earthquakes, disease, famines, and cosmic events in the skies. But those things will not happen until arrests, persecutions, trials, and betrayals of those who follow him occur. There will be costs borne by those who claim Jesus, even to the point of their very lives. So it should not be unexpected that persecution always rises up whenever Jesus is proclaimed, whether it is as little as the teasing or ridicule encountered on social media, or the still present imprisonment of Christians in some nations around the world today. This is still part of being followers of Jesus in a still self-serving and selfish world. This broken world continues to bluster with all about its might, its empires and authorities, its powers and principalities, but even with the ultimatums of empire, it will not have an ultimate say of God on God's plan or purpose. We should not be surprised or find it unexpected that suffering happens in the life of our faith. Adversity is inevitable, but it's how we respond that makes all the difference here. Jesus gives us a distinct order here not to prepare our defenses ahead of our trials. What is Jesus saying? Should we not make some preparations and anticipate some contingencies? What do we need for our faith to go the distance and endure the troubles here and to come? The goal of faith here is not to prepare for every possible income. The goal of faith is to live through adversity when it does inevitably come. As I said before, this is Jesus' last sermon given before the Last Supper. And while it's an announcement of impending doom upon Herod's glorious temple, it is also the same timeline awaiting Jesus in his trial, death, and resurrection. Think about what Jesus talks about here. He too will be brought before authorities, both religious and secular. He too will testify with words that seemingly are unprepared, yet sure in presenting God's truth. And in Luke's version, we have this little strange story of a tiff that happened between Herod Antipas, who was the son of Herod the Great and the ruler of the land of Galilee, and Pontius Pilate, who is the appointed governor of Jerusalem and Judea. Their back and forth in handling Jesus' trial with a jurisdictional cause is as if nation has risen against nation, even that very night. When we confront suffering, we can either see it as a sign of God's absence, which often we do, or an awareness of God's presence, a time to shrink away from the faith, as tragically many have, or an opportunity for faith to shine, for us to grow deeper. In some of the first writings of the church, the Apostle Paul will remind some young Gentile Christ followers that suffering promotes, grows character. And our character can grow without suffering, but it also will be found to be weak and falter easily without some form of resistance or struggle in it. While suffering, it is all too easy to do exactly what Jesus warns us not to do, to look for other ways of following through those who claim Jesus themselves or claim God's authority over things, offering an easy way to avoid suffering. How many people have left the faith because it got too hard for them, and the way they thought God would act was not the way they found God to be? It is easy to be led away from God when we face difficult or adverse times. It is even more likely when we are struck with terror. True greatness, Jesus is reminding the crowd, is not revealed in the grand buildings that has caught their admiration or the great powers or kingdoms of the age. It is when nothing else stands for endurance to the end that ultimately prevails. When it seems the world, and when it is against us, we need to remember that there is much more to the story than what the world knows, and much more activity by God than what the world can see. Redemption is indeed drawing near, but it takes eyes of faith to see and hearts of hope to trust. Whatever comes to pass is also passing through and often away. Troubles are just as much an opportunity to reveal one's faith as to conceal it. When troubles come, will we reveal or conceal our faith? When troubles surround us, we can stay or be led astray by those offering quick and easy alternatives, providing momentary comfort at the price of eternal condemnation. When suffering comes, will we chase after things that take us away from God's purpose or plan? Will we abandon faith to embrace the terror around us? Now, many of us here will not experience a life or death resistance to our faith. We might remember saints who have gone before us in stained glass windows, or remember their testimony still recorded by those who were inspired, who could not believe that one would surrender their life so completely for Jesus. But whether we are given a large act of martyrdom or the quiet acts of witnessing when one has simply asked about what makes you so assured and not losing your mind in the midst of everything that's going wrong, we give a portion of our lives to stand firm against the brokenness of human desire and selfish motivations or wills. When things fall apart, it is both an opportunity and a threat. How we respond changes all perception. Jesus never gave us the assurance of we will avoid suffering, but calls us into suffering. He believed in us enough to offer us not easy answers or ways, but a way for our lives to transform to heroes. When we walk with Christ, we may indeed lose our lives, but with the assurance that not a hair on our head will be lost, we will also never lose our souls. Our contract that we accept when we are called to faith in God is a full disclosure of difficulties, brokenness, problems, and suffering that await. Our faith in God calls us to those broken places, not away from them. The last thing a Jesus follower should look for is a way to cheat from suffering. When the world falls apart, we do not need to know the particulars of when and how. we need to reveal what is our character and whether we will act out in faith, trusting that what is needed to endure will be provided by one who suffered and who has already endured great suffering on our behalf. One of the early Greek followers, Tertullian, said, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." And indeed, for each persecution experienced in the world, whether the ancient Roman or even current oppressive regimes of the world today, belief in Jesus Christ, faith in Jesus Christ, has only grown, if not exploded, by the testimony of those who gave everything to testify to their faith. Our life will require sacrifice in both large and small ways. Adversity is not God's absence, but evidence that God is with us and will remain near us and will help us to endure it. May our faith shine when necessary. May it hold fast when alternatives offer the easy way out. May it always trust that God will provide whatever is needed. That is all that is needed for a full disclosure. Amen.